Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Elisa Sklar, and I am very happy to welcome you here today. We are going to be looking at how to turn your e-newsletter into a place marketing powerhouse. Before I get started, I just want to say a couple things about how we run our webinars here at GIS Planning. You will notice that you are muted. However, we welcome you to ask any questions you may have. You can put those in the questions field in the GoToWebinar control panel on the right-hand side of your screen. I also want to let you know that we're recording today's session and that I will be sharing a link to the recording in an email that'll be in your inbox tomorrow. So feel free to review at your convenience or share with colleagues. You'll also have some contact information if you would like to reach out at the after the session with any additional questions you might have. With that, let us get started. I am going to spend a little bit of time talking about some very practical strategies on how to use your e-newsletter as effectively as possible for place marketing. A few things let's get started with. Well, obviously we want to think about why would anyone send an e-newsletter in the first place. We know that the most important thing is that you have your own objectives clarified. So some people are sending a newsletter to generate new leads or new prospects, to interest businesses in the region, to let businesses within your service territory know if they have expansion plans that they can reach out to you. Perhaps we want to turn our community stakeholders into ambassadors for our area and give them information about the area. So as they travel, they can do that. Maybe it's for local businesses who are already there and you want to also, again, maybe make them ambassadors. They're going to be out and about in the world, especially once COVID ends, but even now virtually. Everyone represents the region they're in. We also have seen newsletters for brokers is another possibility. So just knowing what your goal is with the newsletter is very important. What is it that you're trying to do? You must have those objectives in place. And sometimes if you have multiple objectives, you may find that actually having more than one e-newsletter is appropriate. So that's something that we need to think about at the very beginning as well. Once you have your objectives in place, you can then define your audience. You want to know who it is that you need to reach, and I gave you some examples when we started off there. That is really critical. Who are your audience? Who is the people you're trying to reach? Primary, secondary, tertiary, and then let's define objectives for each of them. That will give you the overall plan for content and for style. Now, the next thing we need to think about is who is this going to? And we know that a newsletter will only be as successful as your email database. So we want to think about ways to build that email database and then to keep it working for you, to maintain it and to keep it fresh. So if you've been sending out email newsletters, you probably know that each time you send one out, you're going to get a bunch of out-of-office replies, which is fine. You can delete those. But you're also going to get notifications about people who have left their job, people who've been replaced by someone else, people who have retired, people who are on maternity leave. Often there's an indication of the person that they're going to be replacing them, or that inquiries can be directed to. Now, within the US, you can add those names into your database. If you are emailing to people in Canada, you cannot do that. There are very strict anti-spam laws, and that is the case for some other countries around the world as well. In Europe, we have GDPR, so people have to actively opt in to be part of an email database. So it is really important that we understand what the laws are in different places and respect them, because even if you're not in that country, you may still face certainly the anger of people you're reaching out to without their consent, but sometimes even fines as well. But nevertheless, it's very important to maintain the database. There always needs to be an opt-out or unsubscribe option for people. You know, we don't really want to email people who don't want to hear from us. So it is really quite critical that we, every time we get those notifications after an email newsletter goes out, that we respect them and update our database accordingly. Content strategies, we're going to be thinking about what goes into an email newsletter, how do you get that information. We want to make sure that sourcing the content isn't a struggle, so we'll talk about some great places that you can find newsletter content that's focused, that it really realizes your objectives, that it's interesting and compelling, and that it actually gets results. And then we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about tracking results and return on the investment, the time and the effort, and any cost that's incurred in putting this together. Many people send out newsletters without really actively tracking that. How do you know if you're just shouting into the wind or if you're actually achieving what you set out to do? So we'll look at some of the key analytics that you're going to want to track anytime you're using an email newsletter and different programs that might be useful to that. So that gives you kind of an overview about the things that we're going to be talking about today, and we can dive into that in the first place. So go back to the idea of why are we sending an email newsletter in the first place? This is so critical. We really want to know why we're doing it. And the reasons, because we've always done it, that's not a great reason. Because I was told to do it, well, you know, that's like a good start, but maybe we need to go a little bit further than that. Because I've seen other people do it, okay, well, maybe they're realizing results, maybe they're not. Let's look a little bit more, and because it seems like what you're supposed to do. And with anything, if you're not doing it well, then maybe there's no point. Maybe your efforts are better spent somewhere else. So let's think about how to make an excellent email newsletter. Now, as I said at the very beginning, we want to know why for every newsletter we've got and for every edition of every newsletter that we send out. So an effectively used an email newsletter can really be a fantastic part of your overall marketing funnel. It can help generate more website traffic. First and foremost, I think that's absolutely critical, because you're going to hear me repeat this over and over again in today's webinar, is every email newsletter should be directing people back to your website or to email. And that is absolutely critical, no matter what your objective is and no matter what your target audience is. There's something you want to share with them. You want them to know more, and you want them to self-select if in fact they're interested in learning more. We want to engage potential investors, site selectors, businesses, making location decisions. Maybe you want to get people to call or email to set up a meeting. Maybe this newsletter is about supporting existing businesses in your community. I know that in a pandemic era, that is absolutely first and foremost on the minds of most of the clients and the economic developers that we're speaking with. So that's very important. Maybe the point of this newsletter is to get people register for an event, a webinar, a workshop, sign up for a podcast, training, networking event of some kind. Maybe your newsletter is designed to build rapport with your corporate realtors. I know that's a pain point for a lot of economic developers. And if you want to establish rapport with them, then you want to develop content that will be of interest to them, that information that will be valuable to them, and to build on that relationship. Maybe you represent a chamber of commerce and you want to build or maintain membership. Absolutely critical to keep your chamber relevant in a digital era. We want to make sure that we're doing digital outreach and providing resources in that way. That is very, very useful. Maybe you want to establish a marketing touch and just stay top of mind. That's certainly a respectable reason to use an email newsletter, and it's one of the things that we tend to see. And maybe you have other reasons of your own. I'm interested to hear them. If you've got other reasons that you use them for, then please feel free to share them in the question field. I'm interested to see what those are. Now, whatever your primary objective is for that specific email edition of that specific email newsletter that you're sending out, write it out and put it on a sticky note and stick it next to the monitor so that you see it. And everything you write in that email newsletter for that edition, you should say, does it help me realize that objective? And that will help you stay focused and stay on task with that. Now, email newsletters really can be powerful marketing tools. Sometimes people think of, retargeting or things that we're doing on social media or video. Certainly, there's lots of cool new ways to do this. But email newsletters, even though they've been around for a long time, if they're properly done, can be very, very effective. We know that you're 6 times more likely to get a click-throughs to your website from an e-newsletter than just with a tweet. We know that more than 3/4 of marketers see active growth in the number of email subscribers. That is what you want to see. That means that you are hitting the right tone and you're actually meeting objectives that are important to the audience you're trying to reach. Email is 40% more effective at acquiring new customers than social media like Facebook or Twitter. So getting new customers into the funnel, very useful. Putting a call to action button, like the ones that you see on the left and the right in this image, is a great way to increase conversion rates. So instead of just a text link, putting a hyperlink in the text, having a button on the bottom is something that our eyes notice, and it increases conversion rates by up to 28%, which is really substantial. For every dollar spent, the average return on investment for email marketing is $44.25. So this is Marketo. This doesn't just include B2B or B2G, things that are economic development, but it's a really interesting point to think about. So email marketing is not expensive except for the time and maybe the investment into the email or inbound software that you're using for it, but you really can get fantastic returns. Now, email overall has a median return of 122%, which is more than 4 times higher than other marketing formats. So social media, direct mail, and paid search as well. So it's relatively easy to do. It just requires a little bit of organization and making sure that you're focused and that you've got excellent content on there as well. Let's take a look at our audience, our who. Who is it that you're trying to reach? And again, I said at the beginning, you might find that you're better off having more than one email newsletter if you have target audiences that have very different interests. So whether that's brokers, site selectors, maybe you're trying to reach potential investors or people who are making location decisions. If you're trying to reach existing businesses, so some of them may be interested in location, but some of them, especially during COVID, are going to have very different questions about how to stay afloat and how to manage the things that are top of mind for them right now. And maybe there's others in your list of who, community stakeholders, who knows what it is. Again, I'm really interested to hear more about what it is that you're trying to do. But this is where we get to define our content so that we know that we're trying to reach those specific people, that we can do it very well. So know your audience. Who is this primary audience? Write out some persona descriptions for each category. So, you know, Bob and Belinda, the broker, maybe tell me a little bit about what you think they're interested in. What kinds of content would be important to them? What are their pain points? What are their primary interests? What questions have they asked when you've met with them in the past? What kinds of language do they use to describe things? That's really important. You want to use the same kind of wording that they use to describe themselves. So in some of the clients that we work with, they talk about brokers, others talk about realtors, others talk about specifically just commercial brokers, real estate agents. So that kind of language, it seems so obvious when we understand what all of those things mean, but you want to use the same kind of wording that your target audience would use to describe themselves and the things they're interested in. What images would they respond to? What videos will they find useful or interesting? So you want to do that for each target audience that you've got, and you can break it down further into personas within them. So if it's someone, let's say, because we think about economic developers all the time here at GIS Planning, we might have the chamber folks, we may have the economic development directors, we have the economic development officers, people who might be working with individual target industries. Maybe we have the economic development, communications, and marketing folks. So each one of those people is a different kind of persona, and they will have different things that are pain points for them, that are primary interests, questions that they've asked. So that's what I mean by personas. So that really helps you understand your audience as closely as possible so that you can tailor content that will be interesting to them. So another example here would be prospective investors. Let's say this is a very common target audience for email newsletters, but when we break that down, that includes site selectors, it includes new businesses that are looking to expand or relocate and are new to your region, maybe existing businesses looking to expand or move. It maybe includes entrepreneurs and startups who are looking to get started but are interested in looking at your region. And also the third parties, the real estate law firms, the accounting firms who work with investors, who help them and facilitate development and moving into a new area. So each one of those folks will have different interests, and we want to come up with content that meets what they're interested in. So clarifying objectives for this audience, just to work with the same example that I gave you at the beginning of prospective investors. So some of the things that would be objectives for prospective investors. One, obviously, make them aware of your region. They want to hear what the value proposition is for your area. Is it, your deep water port? Is it your intermodal facilities? Is it the fantastic quality of life? Is it your, rural picturesque location, but proximity to major metropolitan areas? So there's lots of different things that you'll list in your value proposition. You want to make them aware of that. You want to make them aware also of the organizations and service, your organization that you're sending this out, and also the services in your area. So you may have content, articles, little bits, hyperlinks back to those different services. Another objective, of course, would be to drive traffic to your website. So we always want to make sure that we have very clear hyperlinks back to valuable content that lives on your website, ideally interactive tools, because that's a place where they can go and answer the questions that they're bringing to the process. Maybe an objective is driving qualified leads to those specific tools, to your Zoom Prospector, your interactive GIS data tools, your property database. Sometimes it's about engagement, so just getting them interested in the kinds of things you have to offer. You may have a specific objective of getting them to call or set up an email or fill out a form or register for a webinar to meet with your team. So these are just a lot of the different examples that we might have as objectives for a specific defined audience. And then we will come up with content, so we don't have to hit every single one of those bullet points within a single email newsletter, but that would help us drive content. If you have that listed in front of you, you can then go and look for content that addresses those objectives for that specific interest. So an example that I have up here is from our newest product, which is Zoom Tour. This was produced by NISA in South Carolina, what they call the business corner of South Carolina. And basically, this is a virtual tour that you get to edit yourself. You put in points on the map, images, video, audio, links back to your website, links to your data from your interactive GIS data tools, and it's a themed tour. So you take them stop by stop to show them things related to value proposition. Just a fun, engaging way to showcase these things. And the screenshot that I put here for NISA is about their workforce and their labor. And you can look at information on the map, you can see different images, and they also have data that they've built in there, as well as an audio file that you can listen to and information listed on the left. So this is something that we can link to in the email newsletter. I love to use images, so I wouldn't just describe it in text. I would put this beautiful image in there with a link embedded in the image as well, so that people can go and learn more about workforce in this particular area. That would be one fantastic way to do that, to engage them. Another example here, this is a property report for the town of Marana, and you can see that they've got images, there's of course maps and details about the property itself, and there's a video in this case about the property that's built into the property report. It's visual, it's easy to share, and that's the kind of content. A featured property of the week, for example, is just really a fantastic way to engage people. I'm a very big fan of that. Now, we really want to, of course, determine the how. How are we going to reach out to these people? What will your email newsletter actually look like? So we know that there are lots of fantastic customizable email programs. You might use an inbound marketing platform like HubSpot. We're big fans of HubSpot, but maybe you're using, Marketo or Eloqua or Pardot or any one of the other ones. Maybe you're using an email program on its own and not a full platform, something like MailChimp. That's okay. Whatever you're doing, you want it to be professional, you want it to be customizable, and you want to be able to take advantage of excellent design. Unless you have a design team who can create templates for you, and a lot of economic development teams do not, then you want to be able to use a platform that helps you do that. And also that will help you manage the email list. Again, there's legal implications here. We want to make sure that we're following it. Whatever you use, you want to make sure that your newsletter is mobile friendly. We want to use a lot of photos where appropriate. We want to make sure that your template works with different email clients. You'll see the list, the image on the left here, lets me using HubSpot to test out what my email will look like, what my email newsletter will look like using all of the different clients there, just so I can see and make sure it really works for everybody. You want your logo front and center at the top. Well, it doesn't have to be center, but it does have to be at the top so that it's very clear who this is coming from. When it comes to design, I'm a big fan of less is more. You want some white space. You don't want people to feel overwhelmed. I wouldn't go too heavy on the text. I like to have teaser text, just maybe a paragraph, at most two. I love bullet points, enough that you can then drive people back to the website to learn more. So a teaser for a blog post maybe would be a great example, instead of putting the whole post up there in the newsletter. Integrating social media sharing is so important as well, because you want to make sure that if they see something they like, they can share it on social. always there must be an unsubscribe option. Any legitimate email platform will make it easy for you to do that and make sure that it's legally compliant as well. Okay, great. We're doing really well. We've got our audience, we've got our how, we know how we're doing this. Let's think about our what. Let's think about what content looks for. So what kinds of content prompts you to click through? When you're looking at email newsletters, what are the things that intrigue you? And keep those top of mind. Maybe keep a little list where you know those things. Maybe it's a teaser for an interesting article, registering for a webinar or an event, an image. Listicles are really popular. That's, you know, the top 5 ways to do this, or the top, we always use odd numbers for some reason, as well as the number 10. I don't know why that is, but feel free to play around with that. You know, the top 5 economic development blogs, for example, top 5 properties, a success story, a case study, some practical information that will help your target persona do their job better, an item about someone in the community, something surprising. I just go back to someone I know. So we often do profiles of company owners or brokers or entrepreneurs. Those are fantastic. I love the idea of doing profiles on workforce, people maybe who moved to your area and have taken a job because this is an interesting place for them to be. Why did they choose your town or your county or your city? I think workforce interviews is something that's often overlooked and really quite interesting. So lots of really creative ways that we could play around with what that content might look like. And if you do have promotional content in your newsletter, that's fine, but you want to balance it with some stuff of practical value as well. I always like to give that information away. So let's take a look at some examples from different areas. So this is from Hoosier Energy, one of the Midwest leading economic development organizations. You see that one of the things that they're doing here is promoting their site selector tool. So it's a way that you can click through directly on it. If you're using a site selection tool like Zoom Prospector, you definitely want to promote it in every single one of your email newsletters, because that is one of the places you're driving people back to your website to do something specific. Abbotsford, British Columbia, promoting their tool. I love this featured commercial real estate properties, and if you click on them, they will bring you back directly to the property report. I think that's so important and often overlooked. I love this new business alert. This is really fantastic idea, a new pub in the area or any kind of business. We want to make sure that those businesses feel really welcome. Cedar Hill, Texas is also, again, promoting their use of their sites and buildings database directly in their email newsletter. We see featured properties again here as well in another newsletter. Michigan doing a very clean text-based newsletter here where they have featured news items. You're not doing the reading in the newsletter. It's basically a curated list of links, which is also fantastic. And you want to click through, goes right back to the website so you can learn more about what's happening. And this is a fantastic one from Golden Shovel Agency. Always interested to see what they come up with. They've got links back, they've got the teaser back to the blog or the article. And I love that they tell you how long that is going to take to read. So I think that's really very, very compelling. I like the use of images, and I like the use of the tabs in there as well. Other kinds of ways that you can integrate your data tools is content. So telling the story of your region with data is always one of the things that we promote. And this is a fantastic way to do that for your email newsletter. You will never run out of content. Featured properties, reports, charts, graphs, heat maps. And one of the nice things about the GIS planning tools is that we've got these custom share links built into all of the reports, so it's very easy actually to do that. So you can show off virtual tours, maps of industry sectors, opportunity zones in your area. You can look at consumer expenditures, feature MZ data if you're an MZ subscriber, FDI data, you know, how many projects from what companies of countries around the world have invested in your area. Beautiful infographic blocks, map layers, drive time analyses, all sorts of creative stuff, jobs EQ data. So you see an example here on available properties. That's an example from a newsletter as well. This is actually a social media post, but I thought they did a really nice job on that. Detroit Regional Partnership. We built in these 360-degree virtual tours for every property in every Zoom Prospector system for every client. And they have been capturing the video for that and then using them online. So that is a great way to do that in social media and email newsletters as well. Another shot from our new Zoom Tour product, the themed cloud-based software that lets you create really any kind of tour, as many tours as you want on different themes. Users really navigate their way through the tours. In this case, they're talking about an inland port, and there's all sorts of information that they can see from there. So that would be a nice thing to be able to share. An example here from Stockton, California, where they have a dedicated map using our mapping intelligence component to showcase the opportunity zones in their area. So it comes up with a very compelling visual that can be shared as well. Up in British Columbia, this is again a property map, property reports, and you can see that if you click on the documents and share button over there, then it comes up with that share link on the left-hand side of the screen in blue. Another example here from Cedar Hill, Texas, also showing the share link and how you can do that directly from the tool itself. So that brings people directly back to the website. And I think that's so important. It's so much more effective than just sharing a PDF or an image, because you don't give people anything to do with that. We call it vampire creative. It just kind of sucks the blood out of your marketing instead of sending people back with an action. An example of the FDI report. This is from Florida Power and Light. And I believe we have an example here from Valdosta of an infographic block, which is, again, very compelling, very clean, nice design, and it's something that you can add as an image with a link to your newsletter. Example of a consumer expenditures report. In this case, we're mapping out all of the women's apparel businesses in the city of Charlotte, and you can see what that looks like directly there. So I just want to go through a few more best practices here as we come up to the end of our session today. We know that we always want to have a welcome email to anyone who is subscribed to a newsletter. This is something that gets automatically triggered when somebody signs up for your email newsletter. We want to make sure that we create engaging content, as we've been talking about. You want to send it at the right time. And, conventional wisdom is that we send these Tuesdays and Thursdays either from 9 to 11 a.m. or 3 to 5 p.m. Of course, you can, depending on your program, have it set up, adjusted for the respondents, your audience time zone, so that they get it during the right time. But I think it's okay to play around with that. I don't think it has to be exactly at that time. See what works for your list. And some platforms will tell you, based on past performance, the best time to send something to that list. Figure out the right frequency. Is it something that you're sending every week? Is it something you're sending once a month, every 2 weeks, once a quarter? Figure out, based on your objectives and your list, what works. Keep an careful eye on deliverability, like what happens in terms of opens, in terms of clicks, what works, what hasn't. Now, use a memorable sender name. I don't like to use those reply to, at Gmail, no reply at Gmail, gisplanning.com. Those are really terrible. You really want to have a person's name, someone who is recognizable. I send all of GIS Planning's newsletters under my name because I work with clients, I speak at conferences, I speak to people all the time. They know that I'm an actual person, the director of your organization, the director of communications, someone whose job it is to do this and to work with people is useful. So those are examples of something that you can do in order to put that. And you can change not only the email address, but the name. It could be the name of the person, but it can also say Elisa Sklar from GIS Planning, for example. You can test different kinds of subject lines and pre-headers to make sure that you're getting good opens. Subject lines are so important. And as you can see, the number of characters that you use in email subject lines is really important. Usually your platform will guide you, but the sweet spot, as you can see here, looking at the blue and the green lines for opens and click-throughs, is about 180 to 190 characters tends to be the real sweet spot in getting people both to open and also to read and click through on an email newsletter. So not too long, but also not too short. Lead magnet content. So the thing that you think will be most interesting in that newsletter edition is something that you should mention in your subject line or in your pre-header. so that people are able to see it. And then focus on the calls to action in there. Make sure you have those call to action buttons in there. Make sure your links are in bold, people can see them. You want to get them people back to your website, get them to the registration page, get them to your sites and buildings database, get them to visit that tour. That's what's so critical here. And then of course you want to proofread, test, and preview before hitting send. Nothing is worse than those. I'm actually going to move us past here just in the interest of time. But as I was saying, there's nothing worse than those typos. Make sure you get an extra set of eyes on everything you send. Tracking results. This is the final thing I want to talk about before I leave you today. I know we're going slightly over time here, so I will try and get through this relatively quickly. But it's so important because if you're sending stuff out, we don't want to be shouting to the wind. Again, we want to make sure that there's actual results from what you're doing. So you want to avoid that junk folder purgatory. A really good quality email marketing tool will not relegate you to the spam folder, but that's really important as well. You want to look at overall deliverability, opens, clicks, shares, who's hard bounced, who's reporting you for spam, unsubscribes. Those are big red flags. If that's happening, we want to rethink your subject lines. We want to rethink your content. There should always be stuff of practical value, not just promotional content. I mean, sometimes you send a promo email, that's one thing, but in a newsletter, if you want to keep people regularly reading and consulting, make sure there's good quality content in there for them to use. And then cross-reference with your analytics. So you can do A/B testing on subject lines to see what tends to work better. Your email platform will show you how to do that A/B testing. That means that you're sending out 2 versions of the same newsletter with different subject lines, and then it will let you compare which one got more opens, which one was more effective. So great opportunity for testing with your list. Let's take a look at some examples of analytics. So this is from our Zoom Prospector analytics. This is specifically for economic development for your sites and buildings and GIS data tools, but it's letting us see the usage reports. So Google Analytics is one thing. You're going to get really interesting information from people, but you also want to make sure that you're actually getting information about the economic development side of things. What reports, what buildings are being viewed, what communities are being searched, what reports are being downloaded, what reports are being shared. That's absolutely critical as well. On Google Analytics, you want to make sure that you're earning those visits and that they're coming from the right places. Lead Forensics lets you go a little bit deeper. This is something that we've built onto all of our interactive GIS data tools. We call it Lead Gen ID, but we're using Lead Forensics. It's reverse IP lookup. And that tells you what companies are on your website. Now, it doesn't tell you who from the company. It won't let you know that Elisa from GIS Planning was on your website, just that GIS Planning was actually there. And that's really important because we get a chance to see how they got in. Did they click in from the email newsletter? This is what I'm going to be looking for. And then what is it that they chose to click on? Well, I can see it from the front end in the email platform, but now I get to see it from the website perspective. How long did they spend on that page? And once they landed on your page, where did they go? Did they leave? Was that an exit page? Or did they continue clicking through your website and reading other kinds of things? That's really valuable analytics. And that's where you get to see actually the full impact of a newsletter. An example of the kinds of report that you'll get from Lead Forensics, or what we call Lead Gen ID, that lets you see how much time they spent on it, what platform they were using, what page they looked at, how they moved, what was their journey through your website. Fantastic granular information. So this brings me to the end of my presentation here. As I said, I am happy to take any questions that you might have. Please feel free to put them in the questions field in the GoToWebinar control panel. I know we're over the time I had allotted, but I will take a few moments to answer questions because I see a few that have come in there. Does it make sense to issue multiple newsletters, each aimed at a specific audience? So site selectors versus existing businesses, for example. There's a couple things to consider here. One is the amount of time and resources on your end. Do you have the bandwidth to be able to do that? There may be similar content that you have across the different newsletters, but if you find that you have good quality lists and very distinct target audiences with different objectives, then it might make sense to divide them up and send out different newsletters. I know, as I said at the beginning, engaging with brokers and commercial realtors in your area is something that is a pain point for a lot of economic development organizations. And that is something that you can do quite nicely and elegantly with an email newsletter, but they're going to have very different interests than your site selectors and prospective investors. So in that case, I actually think it would make sense to look at different email newsletters and have, as I said, you can leverage some of the same content across them, but maybe use different language to describe it. Should EDCs think about hiring a full-time person with a writing or journalism background or outsource that writing function? Again, this is really going to vary for the smaller organizations to the big ones. It depends what it is that you can do. I always say that having someone on staff who's really got an excellent writing skills is quite critical, because so much of the work that you're going to be doing is going to require that. So that could be someone who multitasks and does other kinds of things as well. But it's something to think about if you're a small organization and you're hiring an economic development officer, is what their writing skills look like, because they may have to wear more than one hat in the organization, and maybe that's something that they can take on as well, especially since it's something they'll know very well. I do think it's important, if you're going to have this done, that it be done well. And so finding someone within the organization who can do that is fantastic. If you outsource it, there are some great agencies out there that will help you do that and will produce this content with you, then that's certainly possible. So it really depends on your specific organization, your budget, and your workflow. Ideally, if you can produce it with in-house, that's great, because no one is more of an expert on your community than you are. Another question here. Any advice on idea generation for content? There's just not a lot going on sometimes. That's a good point, especially if you are coming from a smaller region. That's where I really find your data tools will come in handy, because there's tens of thousands of variables in there, and you can combine them, generate beautiful heat maps, images, consumer expenditure data. You can map out workforce, you can look at talent, what are the degrees conferred in a 200-mile radius around your community, for example. There's so much fantastic content that you can generate in that way, that even if it's not time-sensitive news, that's something that's happening in your community, there's a lot of opportunity in a newsletter to inform people about who you are and what you do. And I think that's just an excellent way to do that. The data tools are really fantastic. They're so visual, and they will bring people back to your website, which is so useful. How do you start building a distribution list? That's a really great question. Thanks for asking that one. Well, the first thing is I would start in-house with what you've actually already got. So, I mean, you've already been in communication with people, unless you're a brand new organization, in which case I would go to your partner organizations, the municipality, the Chamber of Commerce, the county. There's a lot of partner organizations that you can work with. So you can start by asking them to distribute your email newsletter to get people to sign onto it. If they can help share it, that's fantastic. You can use social media also in parallel to promote your email newsletter and get people to sign up for it. Conversely, you can also use your email newsletter to encourage people to follow you on your social media accounts. I'm not a fan of buying or scraping or harvesting lists, so that is of questionable legality in different districts as well, but that would be where you hire your college intern to go into a PDF and literally copy and paste email addresses from those lists. What tends to happen is you get very high bounce and subscribe and spam reports on those kinds of things. So organically building them does take a bit of time. If you participate or sponsor conferences, trade shows, especially those are happening virtually now as well, but being part of different associations gives you an opportunity also to publicize your organization, to promote your email newsletter, and to get people to organically sign up for them. I like to have a space on your website where you have maybe an archive of past newsletters, but also a dedicated page where you get people to ask people to sign up to make sure they're included in your email newsletter list. That should be something that you promote. You can do, all kinds of personal outreach. It can be promoted on LinkedIn. If you, as a economic development professional, are on LinkedIn, it's also possible to reach out to people individually to ask if you can include them. So it's just an ongoing organic process of encouraging as many people as you know to include themselves. And if you are building really solid content into the email newsletter, you will find a good indication of the fact that you're doing a good job is that that list begins to grow over time because people want to be part of it. They're interested in what you're doing. I think that brings us to the end of our questions, and I'm mindful of the fact that we've gone a little bit over time. I thank you so much for your patience. I thank you for being part of this and for the good work that you're doing for your communities during these challenging times. You can reach out to me with any questions you might have at asklar@gisplanning.com. I will be reaching out to you by tomorrow with a link to this, the video of today's webinar. I appreciate it, and I look forward to connecting with you online as well. Be well, be safe, take care, and thank you for your attention. Goodbye.